So JD Vance has a lot riding on his shoulders right now, and this in fact will be the biggest acid test of his own diplomacy in his career as the US Vice President so far.
Absolutely. He's also the face of the Republican Party post-Trump. So it's significant in that aspect as well, for him to project himself as somebody who can bring about two warring sides to the negotiating table and to ensure that America's interests are not compromised. There's a lot riding on the Republican Party domestically as well. Akanksha, the midterm elections are just around the corner. There is a lot of pressure that's piling up on Donald Trump. So for JD Vance, there is a lot to think about apart from just the ceasefire and what happens in West Asia. What happens back home is also significant.
A very good point raised by you, Poonam, given that you talk about the timing of this war. The midterms are around the corner in the latter half of the year. JD has been tasked with this big Herculean task of ushering in peace, not just for Iran and Israel, but for the entire region. And if we were to look at the domestic front of it, something that you've just now highlighted, let's not forget that JD Vance is also posturing himself, or rather, wants to be viewed as the next presidential candidate for the Republican Party. He has been quite the poster boy for the Republicans, somebody who's also seen as someone who has the support of the MAGA base, who's also had the support of the evangelicals in the United States. And given that the US President Donald Trump himself is staring at the lowest approval ratings, it is JD Vance who's expected to salvage the situation for Republicans at a time when the grand old party in the United States has rifts internally as well, because remember, several senior Republicans have been tendering in their resignations. Some of them are even quoting burnouts. Many of them are saying that they are done with the war situation. Americans themselves are bearing the brunt of this crisis that has been engineered because of this war, the cost of living crisis. So the Republicans are buckling under a lot of pressure. For the US president to wrap up this war as soon as possible would not just be in the best interest of the Americans, but for his own political fortunes and for the political fortunes of the grand old party as well. Poonam.
Absolutely. JD Vance is that individual who was against wars but now is a power broker. Pakistan is the mediating ground. Pakistan perhaps would be in the room when these negotiations happen. Could also be that mediator that passes along messages. We don't know just yet the nitty-gritties of how these negotiations will actually go. Whether the United States and Iranian sides will be in one room or not, we don't know just yet. 12:30 is when we were expecting those talks to begin. Now, we don't know if that's still on track, given it's about noon here in 30 minutes from now. Whether JD Vance, right from the airport, goes straight into the negotiations. Is that what's on agenda? All of that details are still trickling in, and everything is under wraps, Akanksha, as far as Pakistan is concerned, especially given how they want to come out as a white knight sort of a situation, that they brought about world peace. For them too, a lot is at stake, which is why we've seen gag orders that have come out. We've seen security advisories asking people to stay at home.
Absolutely, and that's important that you highlight the kind of gag orders that the Pakistani establishment has come out with, because remember, much of the gaffes, the damage done by, say, Sharif himself, his drafted tweet, and not to forget that hate-spewing tweet that was pushed out by the Pakistani Defense Minister Khwaja Asif, has already received much flack, not just by the Pakistani establishment, but also by the international fraternity, which quickly jumped in to condemn the kind of vile and uncouth language that had been used by the Pakistani Defense Minister. So for that gag order to arrive and be put into place was also something we are being told was a decision that was taken by the Army Chief Field Marshal Munir. He's trying desperately to, in fact, stay relevant in this overall geopolitical scenario. And joining me right now in the newsroom is also Siddhant. Let's quickly rope in Siddhant into the conversation. Siddhant, much is riding on the peace talks today. That's, in fact, stating the obvious. But to give us a sense of how much pressure is on Islamabad to deliver? Take our viewers through that.
No, Akanksha, so there is no as such pressure on them. Perhaps all they are doing this on the request of US CENTCOM, or rather instructions of US CENTCOM. Look, President Trump wanted off-ramp. President Trump wanted ceasefire. He was desperate. He has his own political compulsions. America is a democracy. You need to convince your voters on what you are doing, perhaps approval ratings, so on and so forth. So CENTCOM, along with Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, perhaps wanted off-ramp, and Pakistan is an asset of US CENTCOM in the region. So they were told, they were instructed to get into the picture, speak to all the parties. In fact, this all started not recently. This all started when, for the first time, Munir was invited to the White House for a lunch. And perhaps there was the discussion on Iran at that point in time as well. And this entire meeting was fixed only because President Trump was interested in Iran. And given Pakistan shares border with Iran, perhaps, he was hosted by President Trump. There was discussion about Iran. So since that day, Munir was preparing for mediation, to be playing a significant role in peace efforts, or perhaps in times of war, so on and so forth. And today, the day has come. Perhaps Islamabad is hosting talks. But, as we have been pointing this out from a very long time, that there are flashpoints, there are point of contentions. As far as Lebanon issue is concerned, perhaps there's no clarity. Pakistanis gave false assurance to Iranians that we will be mediating the Lebanon conflict. Then later, JD Vance says that Lebanon is not included. Israel says that we are ready to mediate Lebanon conflict, but at the State Department in Washington, not in Islamabad. So let's see what happens. All the very best to Pakistan. Perhaps we expect they do good job in mediating. And instead of doing copy-paste mediation, perhaps, which they have been doing from last 24 hours, they should do some actual mediation, and perhaps and hopefully this ceasefire lasts long.
Absolutely, which is why they are under pressure to, in fact, deliver in terms of having some sort of bridging of that trust gap that is currently between Tehran and Washington, even if no peace deal is arrived upon. One is not even expecting that at the moment. But let's quickly bring in retired Major Manik Jolly, who will be joining us in the studio in just a bit. But I'm also joined in by Navdeep Suri, who's a former Indian High Commissioner to Egypt and UAE. Many thanks to you, Ambassador Suri, for joining in. If I could quickly bring you in, to begin with, share your assessment of the visuals that are coming in from Pakistan right now. A firm handshake exchanged between US Vice President JD Vance and, of course, Field Marshal Munir. What do you make of the body language and, of course, the overall disposition of the US Vice President at the moment?
Well, there's no doubt that in the last year, we've seen a considerable improvement in relations between the US and Pakistan. There's also no doubt that Field Marshal Munir has struck a bit of a personal relationship with President Trump, and that's something that you see being reflected in the welcome that is being accorded to Vice President Vance. So I don't see this as anything extraordinary.
All right. And in terms of now, the US delegation, we are being told, Ambassador Suri, is in fact 300 members. It comprises 300 members. On the other hand, you have the Iranians, close to 70 of them. What do you make of the numbers if one were to compare both sides?
Well, any US delegation travels with a very large contingent of specialists, of linguists, of security personnel, of intelligence personnel. That's standard procedure. The Vice President arrives in Air Force 2, and there's a standard drill to these things. The Iranians probably have a smaller contingent, which is normal for them. But again, I would typically expect that there would be regional specialists, area specialists, intelligence experts, security experts. All of these people will not be at the table. They will be there to give their advice to the principals.
Right. Let's, in fact, going to request you, Ambassador, stay with us. We are getting in some breaking inputs. as this is a CNN News 18 mega exclusive. In inputs that have been brought to us by investigations editor Manoj Gupta, we are being told that Pakistan has been briefing both sides, and Iranian demands and positions have also been shared with Pakistani intermediaries. Now, Pakistan is conveying them to arriving, in fact, before arriving of the US team, there's also an expectation of a direct face-to-face meeting between the United States and Iran. Remember, important to emphasize that it's still an expectation. Whether or not that actually translates, we'll have to see. The main process is expected to start today, any time from now, soon after the US Vice President JD Vance's arrival, that, as you can see, has already happened. Let's quickly go across to Siddhant, who will share more details. Yes, Siddhant.
Well, that's right. So, Akanksha, this input has been brought to us by Securities Editor Manoj Gupta. Now, Manoj is reporting that Pakistan has been briefing both sides, and Iranian demands and positions were shared with Pakistani intermediaries. Now, Pakistan conveying them to the arriving US team. Direct face-to-face US-Iran meetings are the main purpose, expected to start Saturday, April 11, or shortly after Vance's arrival. In fact, JD Vance arrives in Islamabad. Reports suggest an ambitious but realistic goal of 2-3 rounds of intensive talks with both delegations described as fully empowered. Sticking points remain significant: Lebanon ceasefire linkage, nuclear issues, Hormuz access, sanctions relief. An initial outcome could be extending the ceasefire while continuing negotiations. Iranian demands full lifting of US sanctions, Akanksha, recognition of Iran's right to uranium enrichment, Iranian control and sovereignty over the Hormuz, securities guarantees and non-aggression pact to prevent future attacks, compensation and reparations for war damage, end to all regional conflicts, including Lebanon, termination of relevant UN sanctions. So there are sticking points. Perhaps that's what Manoj is reporting for us, Akanksha. Let's see how developments take place in Islamabad.
All right, Major Manik Jolly is also joining us from the studios of CNN News 18. Many thanks to you, Major Manik Jolly, for joining in. I'm also joined in by Ambassador Suri at the moment, but if Major Jolly could also weigh in on the body language. It's very interesting set of visuals that we can see right now, where the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister Aisha Akdar can be seen how he's in fact leading Field Marshal Asim Munir, as Asim Munir looking extremely elated while greeting the US Vice President, who of course is exchanging firm handshakes with the Deputy Prime Minister, with Field Marshal Asim Munir. What do you make of it, Major Manik Jolly?
Yeah, thanks, Akanksha. So, as far as anybody entering into a negotiation, you would expect a very positive and bright kind of, you have to look the part. You cannot be entering in a morose state, and it kind of comes with a defeatist attitude, and you cannot be sitting at such a critical negotiation table if that is the first signal you are sending out. And body language is kind of a first signal. So how US delegation and the Vice President have arrived, large numbers, intimidating officer in a way, and with a very positive outlook, it means it kind of, we are confident what we want, and most probably we will walk away with what we are looking for. And a good point you brought out, it's Asim Munir, who's greeting everyone and leading. It is a traditional shift from how democracies work. I mean, last year after Op Sindoor, when he made himself Field Marshal, it was an unsaid rule that he will be leading the country. So wherever it is meeting Trump or talking to Chinese, or even now receiving JD Vance, he is taking the lead because he is the de facto leader of the country. It is actually a dictatorship, just a front of democracy, and Sharif is working so that the people don't say that it's a dictatorship. The world community doesn't criticize, but that's how it is. And they are also looking very happy and excited because I think
tensions remain high despite ongoing diplomatic efforts in Islamabad. This, as US President Donald Trump has warned that military action remains possible if Iran does not comply, stating that Washington will move ahead in the Gulf with or without Iran, and even claiming it could finish Iran. Amid this backdrop, delegations from the United States and Iran have already arrived in Islamabad for a high-stakes talks aimed at de-escalation of this ongoing conflict in West Asia. The Iranian delegation, led by its parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher includes around 70 members. Among them is the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the Iranian ambassador to Pakistan as well. The American team is significantly larger with roughly 300 members. It is also led by the US Vice President JD Vance, along with key figures such as Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Iran is expected to push for structured discussions under a proposed 10-point framework. However, according to Iranian media outlet Tasneem News, the talks have likely been delayed. Earlier, they were reportedly to start and commence at 12:30 p.m. local time. Contrary to earlier reports of that start, negotiations are now expected to begin much later in the afternoon. On that note, getting in some breaking inputs with regards to the IDF. All right, we're being told that Israel's defense forces continue to thwart launches towards the state of Israel. New footage of strikes on launchers and terror squads that launched rockets has now been released by the IDF is in fact what we are being told. Let's quickly play out those visuals also. If I may also request my team to in fact flash those visuals on the big screen as the IDF releases those visuals. As you can see, this is the IDF in fact thwarting those attacks that are being directed by Hezbollah, most likely towards the state of Israel. The timing of these strikes is extremely significant because we all know that the IDF and Hezbollah have been trading strikes, and this is indeed going to be a key sticking point during the talks in Islamabad. If you can see, these visuals are indeed not just precision strikes, but also the IDF in fact looking towards thwarting the attacks that are currently taking place and are being directed towards the state of Israel. I quickly bring in Siddhant, who will help us understand the strategy over here, because reports were indicating that Israel has in fact arrived upon a tactical pause. It doesn't seem like it. Siddhant?
Well, that's right. So these strikes are Israel's way of sending message to those who are in Islamabad, perhaps mediating without the consent of Israel, full consent of Israel. Pakistanis gave assurance to Iranians that we will be discussing Lebanon. In fact, later on, this was revealed by the Americans that Lebanon was never the part of the negotiation in Islamabad. Now, Israel wants to discuss the Lebanon conflict in Washington at the State Department. So it's Israel's way of sending message to those who are holding talks in Islamabad, and perhaps these footages are being released, Akanksha, by IDF.
Right.
Precision strikes are being carried out. Objective is to create buffer zone, expand buffer zone for Israel's security guarantee.
Stay with me, getting in more breaking inputs on that note. This, as Siddhant was also highlighting, that the IDF continues to release these footages. Remember, it's also giving IDF significant leverage to, in fact, justify why they are continuing to strike southern Lebanon. Information now coming in that the IDF has in fact conducted a strike on southern Lebanon. It's been titled the Blue Triangle. It continues to target Hezbollah members in southern Lebanon and even their rocket launch platforms. Let's quickly take this forward with Siddhant. So Siddhant, even when we were interacting with the Israeli spokesperson of the IDF in the foreign ministry earlier, Israel's been vehemently maintaining that they will not stop till they have completely annihilated the terror infrastructure hosted by Hezbollah.
Well, that's right. So there's a reason to it. If you look at Israel's geography, Akanksha, then they are sitting on the Golan Heights. Perhaps there they are dominating that particular border. As far as Gaza front is concerned, buffer zone was existing and perhaps is now expanded and security beefed up, tightened up. But that Gaza area is flat, so it's easy for Israel as far as the security purposes are concerned. But as far as the southern Lebanon border is concerned, Akanksha, Israel's objective is to expand the buffer zone, and this area is mountainous.
Right.
It is rocky, mountainous, not a flat area. So if Hezbollah fires at northern Israel from a height, from a mountain, perhaps it becomes Israel. Tactically, it becomes difficult for them perhaps to respond, or they have a very little response time, so on and so forth. So the whole idea is to expand the buffer zone. And this area is, the challenges in this area, Akanksha, is that there are a lot of civilians living here, the civilian localities, etc. So repeated calls have been given by Israel to evacuate those areas. The bombarding and strikes are being carried out at Hezbollah hideout. So the objective is to expand the buffer zone so that northern Israel cannot be targeted and gets out of the range of the Hezbollah rockets.
True. Stay with me. More inputs, in fact, coming in. This as we quickly shift focus back to Islamabad. We are, in fact, getting in the latest update on what to expect out of the negotiations that are all set to take place. We're being told that in roughly 25 minutes from now at around 1:30 p.m. IST, the meeting is all set to take place between the Iranian delegation and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Sharif. Now, why is this important? Because at the moment, reports are indicating that Pakistan is in fact relaying messages instead of just bringing both the parties face to face. And perhaps Siddhant could also weigh in on the information that's trickling in. Siddhant?
Of course, because Iranians, in fact, if you go by what Mohammad Ghalibaf wrote on X the other day before yesterday, Akanksha, if I'm not mistaken, he very categorically takes Shehbaz Sharif's name and said that it was Shehbaz Sharif who assured Iranians that Lebanon is the part of the negotiation in Islamabad. And in fact, he also says, Ghalibaf, if we can also show that that X post by Mr. Ghalibaf. He also says that there is no room for backtracking and denial. Now, Shehbaz Sharif is walking a tightrope here. He assured Iranians that Lebanon will be discussed. Now, Americans are saying that Lebanon will not be discussed. Israel says that we will discuss Lebanon in Washington, D.C. And this is the reason that now Iranians want to meet Shehbaz Sharif first. That's what even Manoj is reporting, and the Iranian media is also reporting, that the first meeting will take place between Iranians and Shehbaz Sharif. And in fact, definitely Iranians are going to take up this issue of Lebanon and sanctions relief, etc., etc. There are many other flashpoints as well. And if kuch baat aage badhti hai, kuch progress hoti, then they will be meeting the Americans.
Many thanks to you, Siddhant, for breaking down all those latest that are coming in. We will continue to bring you all those updates, which Siddhant is also bringing to us. On that note, let's also try and get in some perspective. And for that, let me introduce our esteemed guests. I'm joined in by Ambassador Meera Shankar, who is a former Indian ambassador to the United States. Retired Major Manik Jolly, security expert, also joins in. I'm also joined in by Yossi Beilin, who is a former Israeli Minister of Justice and former Israeli Cabinet Minister. Many thanks to all of you for joining in. If I could quickly bring in Mr. Beilin on the fact that Israel is not at the talking table today. Mr. Beilin, what is your assessment of how much of an Israeli perspective will be presented in Islamabad, given that Pakistan doesn't even recognize the state of Israel?
Well, I believe that it is a little bit weird that Israel is not represented in Islamabad. I would like Israel to be there to present our interests and to negotiate with the other side. Otherwise, it is very cumbersome and, if I may say so, even childish.
All right. Ambassador Meera Shankar, would you like to weigh in on the fact that a direct face-to-face meeting is still not happening? The Iranians have expressed their desire to engage first with the Pakistani side, which, as we all know, is going to be represented first by Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and not to forget the Field Marshal Munir. And then perhaps it will be decided whether or not both sides are even willing to be at the table. What does it speak of the fragility of the situation in your point of view?
Look, the ceasefire has been fragile because obviously there seems to be a difference in the perception of the two sides as to what was agreed for the ceasefire. And Lebanon is the main sticking point right now, though the gulf on other issues is also extremely wide, going by the positions put forward in the 10-point US proposal, 10-point Iranian proposal and the 15-point US proposal. But Israeli strikes on Lebanon which almost coincided with the ceasefire, have led the Iranians to say that this is going against what they were given to understand, and that was that the ceasefire would extend to Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. And of course, the US saying that there was never any agreement to have Lebanon as part of the discussion. So, right at the very beginning, you're seeing that the ceasefire itself is shaky. And of course, the Iranians have again denied access to the Strait of Hormuz. Because they say that the conditions for the ceasefire and for them to open the straits have not been fulfilled. But their delegation is there in
Right.
Islamabad. They had threatened that they won't send a delegation, but their delegation is there in Islamabad. And let's see where this goes.
Absolutely, because both sides have their own very concrete demands, and who is in a position of power is also something we will be weighing in on. Ambassador Shankar, hold on to those thoughts. In fact, we are getting in some information thick and fast coming in from Pakistan. This is a CNN News 18 exclusive brought to us by Investigation Center Manoj Gupta. We are being told that Pakistan has strictly implemented a very controlled policy for its media. The Pakistan Ministry of Information and Broadcasting is warning all local and international journalists to steer clear of any form of speculation, only refer to official inputs being shared by the Pakistani Ministry of Information, and that there should be no freedom given to any independent news journalists. They are certainly very worried at the moment, and I want to quickly bring in Major Manik Jolly, who is currently in the CNN News 18 studios with me. Major Jolly, what do you make of this? One would in fact want to ask that this kind of a gag order should have been perhaps issued to their own cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister in the first place to begin with.
Exactly. I think it is a fallout of what the foreign minister tweeted a couple of days, 2 days back, and it has led to a lot of reactions and anger from international community, especially Israel, who's a very critical member in these negotiations. So on one side you are trying to act like a mediator, and on other side you have loose cannons like your ministers calling entire state cancerous and should be put to hell. So I think this is, and Pakistan has a lot riding on these negotiations. It is a redemption, it is a revival of Pakistan as a state, as somebody who can kind of move away from their image of terrorist state and a center of international terror. This could actually change their image, hence they do not want to take any chances. And Pakistan has a history of having too many spokespersons around the country because it doesn't have a centralized system as such. There's a democracy, there's a whole ISPR, there are independent journalists, YouTubers, and any statement can harm their chances of doing that. So from their side, they are trying to put as many barriers as possible, and this gag order is just a reflection that they do not have control of who speaks what, and B, they are so scared of reality coming out that they do not want anybody saying anything. No speculation, no analysis, nothing at all. Only official press releases.
Yossi Belin, do you think Israel should have even signed up for the United States arriving in Islamabad for these negotiations? One really wonders if Israel has to look towards Washington, D.C. to pursue parallel negotiations with Lebanon. Then what is one to make of these peace talks at a time when they ideally should have followed a quadrilateral format?
Well, the interest of Israel is to distance the nuclear facilities from Iran, to separate between Iran and the nuclear facilities, on the one hand, and to disarm Hezbollah in Lebanon. Of course, the United States will play a very important role in implementing those things because it is I think that more or less the same targets of the United States and Israel. If this is the case, then I don't think that we should insist upon procedure, and I'm happy that this is not apparently the case. even if we don't participate ourselves in the negotiations. And the big question, is how far is Iran of today ready to go in order to really negotiate seriously and find solutions for the problems, while we know more or less what the solutions are.
Oh, absolutely. Mr. Belin, going to request you to continue staying with us. Ambassador Shankar, please stay with us, because much rests on Iran now removing that blockade from the Strait of Hormuz. Because remember, the US President has made it amply clear whether or not Iran complies with the demand to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the United States will ensure that it reopens the Strait of Hormuz. The entire global economy has come to a screeching halt. Major Manik Jolly, I'm sure you will be able to weigh in, given that we were just a while ago discussing that if indeed the conflict now moves to a maritime conflict around the Strait of Hormuz, you've made a very interesting point about how the conflict will not perhaps be revolving around Karg Island. It will be this island, which is Keshem. Why do you say so?
So, Akanksha, I mean, the biggest choke point, proverbially speaking, like has come to Strait of Hormuz, right? US, it is the biggest pressure point for US right now. And if they forcefully try to open, it is the island of Keshem they have to fight on. This is almost 1,500 square kilometer island, bigger than some of the smaller countries. It has underground rocket and missile bases. It's, I think there's a term called city of missiles. It has fast boat swarms, which can go against larger ships, aircraft carriers and all. It has immense, the exact number is not known, but it has immense IRGC presence and army presence.
Okay.
So this is Iran's farthest and one of the most solid outpost bastion of their defense into the, this is Strait of Hormuz, what we are looking at.
But given, okay, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're looking at the Strait of Hormuz over here. If I may just slightly expand it further for our viewers.
Yeah.
You're looking at Hormuz over here, you're looking at Keshem, then you also have Gachi Bala, and this is roughly where Karg is also there. Given that there have already been 2 strikes conducted by the United States and Israel as far as Karg is concerned, it's also the pearl of the Persian Gulf. Why wouldn't the United States and Israel want to take over Karg? They also have military installations which have already been targeted.
So while everybody was focused on Karg, see, attack on Karg, it is not as heavily defended as that. You see, this is the Strait of Hormuz. Karg is somewhere here. And they wanted to show that we have reach to your prize, your crown jewel, right? We can take out what provides 90% of your oil. We can. So they took out the military installations. But this is where the defense happens of the strait. It is assumed that just bombing Karg would not be beneficial for either parties.
Why?
Because one, you do not want to leave the country in such a state of devastation that the infrastructure for revival of the country and the global economy is hit. It would be very wrong on US to do that.
Okay.
Secondly, it is a kind of a red line which once crossed. If you destroy Karg, actually you've kind of broken backbone of Iran's economy. There's no coming back from that. There will never be any negotiation after that, for sure. So yes, you can assume they'll not go after the infrastructure and oil supply in Karg. But if it comes to hostilities, this is place you have to fight.
Absolutely. And then going by that logic, it is the entire Strait of Hormuz where you will see additional deployment of the naval warships of the United States as well. In fact, stay with me. We're getting in some more breaking inputs. Let's quickly go across to those breaking inputs that are coming in right now. Being told that as per Tasneem News Agency, which remember is in fact also known almost as a de facto state mouthpiece for the IRGC, it's going on to declare that Iran is to raise the issue of the US breaches of commitments with the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Now, that is in fact on expected lines, because this is something that was already expected when the parliamentary speaker of Iran, Mohammad Ghalibaf, remember, released that image when he was traveling in his aircraft. He in fact had images of all of those innocent children who were killed in that bombing on the school in Minab. Let's quickly go across to Ambassador Meera Shankar on that note. Ambassador Meera Shankar, if I could quickly bring you in on that image that has been released by Mohammad, that was already an indication of how much anger is brewing within the Iranian leadership with regards to the war crimes that have been committed on either sides. But in the inputs that are coming in, it's being made amply clear that Iran will be taking that up with Pakistan as well.
Well, obviously, this is a matter of great concern to the Iranians because their people have been subjected and their infrastructure to very severe attacks by the US and Israel in terms of, the damage that has been inflicted. Clearly, there's an order of magnitude of difference between the damage that Iran has suffered and that it has been able to mete out to its adversaries. So it's an issue which is of importance to the Iranians, but I think more important right now is going to be the talks about talks, really, because it seems that the perception of what will be included in the talks, what are the conditions for the talks to take place, those perceptions seem to be varying. You know, as I said, the US says Lebanon was never a part of the talks. Iran says it was given to understand that it would be very much on the table. And so they have withheld the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. For the US, that is the most important issue right now. Because shipping is held up, global energy prices are rising, and therefore opening the strait is the critical issue. So how they resolve this remains to be seen. Will the Iranians enter direct talks with the US? Will they continue these indirect talks or what? We still don't know. I think we have to wait and see.
You know, you've used a very interesting terminology, talks before talks. Yossi Belin, would you like to weigh in on that phrase that's been used, talks before talks, because many are indicating how talks may not yet happen given that the Iranians are still very skeptical of coming face to face with the Americans. They're saying that the Americans have a certain pattern to the way they operate. There's a war, there is a ceasefire, there are talks, and then there's war again. They certainly want that pattern to break, and before they can do that, do you think that today what we see in Islamabad will be an attempt to only sort of address the trust deficit that currently exists, not just between Tehran and Washington, but also between Tel Aviv and Tehran?
Well, talks before talks is something which is not new. In many cases, it is important, and in some cases, it is even more important than the talks themselves. Why? Because you are actually creating in such talks the framework in which the negotiations on the main issues take place. And this is why I don't dismiss the importance of such kind of talks. You decide what are the issues that you want to raise. When you want to raise this issue, you actually decide upon the pace of the negotiations, and this is why they are so important. I mean, for me, I will tell you, I believe that such talks may succeed only if both sides want to succeed. It seems obvious, but this is not always the case. Sometimes you see that negotiators are coming to the negotiating table in order to torpedo the talks. And so if this is the case, if both sides want to solve the problem, then I think that there is a chance. And I think that the importance of the talks before talks is very, very significant.
Absolutely. Also, a lot is going to be decided and will be resting on the talks that happen in Washington next week between Tel Aviv and, of course, you're also looking at Lebanon getting there, which will be represented by the Lebanese Prime Minister himself. So a lot will rest on those talks, given that the Israeli perspective will truly be factored in Washington, if not in Islamabad today. I want to quickly bring in closing thoughts and give that to Major Jolly over there. Major Jolly, how do you assess the Iranian position right now? Analysts have highlighted how the Iranians, even if their delegation is just comprising 70 members, in a sharp contrast to the US delegation, which comprises 300 members, they are indeed in a position of power because of this unprecedented blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, not to forget the fact that the kind of strategic might they have displayed through their own retaliatory strikes has already established the fact that what US and Israel were doing was also a strategic miscalculation on their part.
Yeah, Akanksha, I would agree. I mean, they are negotiating from a place of strength because at least for US, the entire thing comes down to Strait of Hormuz. And you know, either they open it on a negotiating table, Iran agrees to that, or they have to get into a very bloody war which has no end to it. And the problem is, it is not just about fighting the war. For the entire duration of the war, and it could go on for months, while US may claim we will open it by force, the choke on the economy that will happen, global prices of oil that will go up, will surmount so much pressure on US that they already know it is a vicious cycle, chicken and egg. Should we fight and choke the economy, or we don't fight and give in to Iran's demands? So I think Iran is definitely on negotiating from a place of strength on Strait of Hormuz, and second on the Lebanon also. They know that Hezbollah is present in Lebanon. That is what Israel is going after, and that becomes a playing trump card. Okay. I mean, not the trump, for them to play actually that, see, Israel is breaking the ceasefire. They'll not pull these guys out, and even though Hezbollah has been firing more rockets on Israel than the entire Iran missile attacks, but they would use it as a card to play it in the negotiations.
I'm so sorry to, in fact, quickly go across to some big breaking input coming in. There's a word coming in from the Iranian Vice President. He's gone on to say that if we negotiate in Islamabad with representatives of America first, an agreement is going to be beneficial to both sides, and the world could be a more peaceful place probably. However, if we face representatives of Israel first, there will be no deal, and we will be inevitably continuing our defenses even more vigorously than before if we engage with the Israelis, and the world will face greater costs to that. If I could quickly go across, in fact, I'm running short of time as much as I would have liked to involve and engage my guests on that piece of breaking news that has come in. Remember, the Iranians have made it amply clear that they have decided to engage with the United States first and not the Israelis. We'll have to see how much of that engagement yields real concrete results in Islamabad.
On your screens are of JD Vance arriving in Islamabad. The US delegation on board Air Force 2 has reached Pakistan for the all-crucial talks between the Iranian side and the United States' side. It is a tense weekend as we look over what is going to be the outcome of these negotiations. The war in West Asia hinges on these negotiations that will take place over this weekend in Islamabad as we speak. JD Vance there being welcomed, a guard of honor for him as he's welcomed by the Pakistani delegation. The Pakistani ministers there flanking him, welcoming him. We're yet to see Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and the rest of the delegation. But JD Vance there making the first exit out of Air Force 2 on the tarmac at Noor Khan base. A ceremonial welcome there for JD Vance as he lands in Islamabad. Remember, 12:30 is when we were expecting those negotiations to begin between the two sides. There are several sticking points as far as Iran and United States is concerned. There is a 10-point proposal that was floated by Iran, a 15-point proposal that was floated by the United States. Discussions on those fronts will be taking place when the two sides get into the negotiating room. Akanksha now joins us, getting us more details there. Akanksha, a ceremonial guard of welcome for JD Vance there. We're yet to see who else is part of this delegation. At the moment, it's just JD Vance who seems to be departing from the airport.
True, but to receive him, the Pakistani Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi is very much in attendance, as is the Field Marshal Asim Munir also. This, as the US Vice President has just landed from Air Force 2. He's in fact at the Noor Khan Air Base, is what we are being told. And any time from now, we can expect the talks to commence. Remember, reports coming in from CNN have indicated that the talks are scheduled to happen at 12:30 p.m. We do not know. There could very much be a delay as well. Much of it also rests on what the Iranians want. We are being told that the Iranian delegation had a meeting with the Field Marshal Asim Munir last evening. But as of now, what we can tell our viewers, these are the latest visuals coming in as the ceremonial guard also all set to take place. But in those visuals that you can see on the screen, Poonam, that is Asim Munir and, of course, the Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi. Asim Munir, in fact, exchanging a firm handshake with the US Vice President JD Vance, who has arrived at the Noor Khan Air Base right now. We're also being told that he was on Air Force 2, his aircraft, and in those visuals which we had captured of his aircraft, we could see that the Pakistani Air Force fighter jets were also accompanying the Air Force 2 aircraft of the US Vice President. It's a grand welcome for the US Vice President JD Vance. As we all know, he will be fronting the American delegation, which is in fact comprising 300 members. And if you were to just tally the numbers or compare that with the Iranian delegation, it is barely 70 on the other side. So a lot of posturing over there. US reminding Iran that it is in a position of power, but given by the strategic breakthroughs that Iran has managed in this over 40-day war, it goes on to also indicate that Tehran also has some key bargaining chips at the table, which most importantly includes the Strait of Hormuz. The blockading of that, remember, has been unprecedented, none of which was expected. Moreover, they are also looking towards replenishing. They still have the missile stockpile capacity. They also have much of, say, an influence when it comes to their nuclear facilities, which are very much underground, will require a ground incursion, something that the US is extremely skeptical of. So even though if you look at the body language, US Vice President looking extremely cheery and positive, and that message I must refer to, which he had sent out before embarking on this trip, he had gone on to say that we are glad Iranians are joining us for these talks, but they must remember that if they do not come to a conclusion, or if they are not willing to arrive upon a peaceful resolution, then the United States is prepared for any repercussion. To add to that, the US President Donald Trump himself had come out with that message, a very stern one, that US warships are very much ready, and whether or not Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz, they are certainly prepared to do so. So the US Vice President, the body language looking extremely warm, cheery, as he's greeted by the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Ishaq Dar. Accompanying him is also the Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi, and leading them, of course, is the Field Marshal Asim Munir. It's interesting to observe that there's no presence of the Pakistani Prime Minister right now, even though the Pakistanis are going out of their way to woo the Americans. And it's interesting to also observe that there's no presence of the Defense Minister Khwaja Asif, who, remember, has already received much flack after he pushed out that anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist tweet.
Perhaps the wisest decision that Pakistan can perhaps take. But Akanksha, as far as JD Vance is concerned, a lot is riding on this man who's the face of these negotiations for the American team. He's been a skeptic of foreign wars. He's now navigating to this very tenuous position that many would say US is negotiating from.
Absolutely, and that is why JD Vance was brought into the picture, because remember, when Operation Epic Fury began, JD Vance was in fact standing out because of the silence that he had been maintaining on the conflict. Critics had already started questioning why JD Vance is not part of the vocal Trump administration. We had seen that Pete Hegseth, the War Secretary, the Defense Secretary, had been extremely vocal about Operation Epic Fury. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, also was significant through the comments that he would make. But JD Vance had been maintaining a strategic silence. Soon after the failure of the talks and the way Iran started retaliating, the need to involve JD Vance was felt. More importantly, as you highlighted, he's also somebody who's known to be against wars. He also has been extremely frank and honest about his own observations with regards to the headway in the war. In fact, New York Times reporters also indicated that when the US president was deciding on taking on this war, JD Vance was the only one who stuck his neck out, warned the US president that he didn't think it was a very wise decision, but he would stand by the US president, go ahead with whatever the US president decides to do. And that is exactly what he has done. So even when JD Vance was included, he was very frank and honest. When he spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister, he did condemn him and categorically dismissed him for coming up with that idea of engineering regime change in Iran. He said that this was a strategic miscalculation, a blunder rather, and he is someone who believes that this war should in fact come to a conclusion. But on what terms and conditions? This is going to be a key acid test for JD Vance. As US President has always said that if these talks are a failure, I will blame JD for it. And if indeed they are a success, then I'll take all the credit. So JD Vance has a lot riding on his shoulders right now. And this, in fact, will be the biggest acid test of his own diplomacy in his career as the US Vice President so far.
Absolutely. He's also the face of the Republican Party post-Trump. So it's significant in that aspect as well, for him to project himself as somebody who can bring about two warring sides to the negotiating table and to ensure that America's interests are not compromised. There's a lot riding on the Republican Party domestically as well. Akanksha, the midterm elections are just around the corner. There is a lot of pressure that's piling up on Donald Trump. So for JD Vance, there is a lot to think about apart from just the ceasefire and what happens in West Asia. What happens back home is also significant.
A very good point raised by you, Poonam, given that you talk about the timing of this war. The midterms are around the corner in the latter half of the year. JD has been tasked with this big Herculean task of ushering in peace, not just for Iran and Israel, but for the entire region. And if we were to look at the domestic front of it, something that you've just now highlighted, let's not forget that JD Vance is also posturing himself, or rather, wants to be viewed as the next presidential candidate for the Republican Party. He has been quite the poster boy for the Republicans, somebody who's also seen as someone who has the support of the MAGA base, who's also had the support of the evangelicals in the United States. And given that the US President Donald Trump himself is staring at the lowest approval ratings, it is JD Vance who's expected to salvage the situation for Republicans at a time when the grand old party in the United States has rifts internally as well, because remember, several senior Republicans have been tendering in their resignations. Some of them are even quoting burnouts. Many of them are saying that they are done with the war situation. Americans themselves are bearing the brunt of this crisis that has been engineered because of this war, the cost of living crisis. So the Republicans are buckling under a lot of pressure. For the US president to wrap up this war as soon as possible would not just be in the best interest of the Americans, but for his own political fortunes and for the political fortunes of the grand old party as well. Poonam.
Absolutely. JD Vance is that individual who was against wars but now is a power broker. Pakistan is the mediating ground. Pakistan perhaps would be in the room when these negotiations happen. Could also be that mediator that passes along messages. We don't know just yet the nitty-gritties of how these negotiations will actually go. Whether the United States and Iranian sides will be in one room or not, we don't know just yet. 12:30 is when we were expecting those talks to begin. Now, we don't know if that's still on track, given it's about noon here in 30 minutes from now. Whether JD Vance, right from the airport, goes straight into the negotiations. Is that what's on agenda? All of that details are still trickling in, and everything is under wraps, Akanksha, as far as Pakistan is concerned, especially given how they want to come out as a white knight sort of a situation, that they brought about world peace. For them too, a lot is at stake, which is why we've seen gag orders that have come out. We've seen security advisories asking people to stay at home.
Absolutely, and that's important that you highlight the kind of gag orders that the Pakistani establishment has come out with, because remember, much of the gaffes, the damage done by, say, Sharif himself, his drafted tweet, and not to forget that hate-spewing tweet that was pushed out by the Pakistani Defense Minister Khwaja Asif has already received much flack, not just by the Pakistani establishment, but also by the international fraternity, which quickly jumped in to condemn the kind of vile and uncouth language that had been used by the Pakistani Defense Minister. So for that gag order to arrive and be put into place was also something we are being told was a decision that was taken by the Army Chief Field Marshal Munir. He's trying desperately to, in fact, stay relevant in this overall geopolitical scenario. And joining me right now in the newsroom is also Siddhant. Let's quickly rope in Siddhant into the conversation. Siddhant, much is riding on the peace talks today. That's, in fact, stating the obvious. But to give us a sense of how much pressure is on Islamabad to deliver, take our viewers through that.
No, Akanksha, so there is no as such pressure on them. Perhaps all they are doing this on the request of US CENTCOM, or rather instructions of US CENTCOM. Look, President Trump wanted off-ramp. President Trump wanted ceasefire. He was desperate. He has his own political compulsions. America is a democracy. You need to convince your voters on what you are doing, perhaps approval ratings, so on and so forth. So CENTCOM, along with Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, perhaps wanted off-ramp, and Pakistan is an asset of US CENTCOM in the region. So they were told, they were instructed to get into the picture, speak to all the parties. In fact, this all started not recently. This all started when, for the first time, Munir was invited to the White House for a lunch. And perhaps there was the discussion on Iran at that point in time as well. And this entire meeting was fixed only because President Trump was interested in Iran. And given Pakistan shares border with Iran, perhaps, he was hosted by President Trump. There was discussion about Iran. So since that day, Munir was preparing for mediation, to be playing a significant role in peace efforts, or perhaps in times of war, so on and so forth. And today, the day has come. Perhaps Islamabad is hosting talks. But, as we have been pointing this out from a very long time, that there are flashpoints, there are points of contentions. As far as Lebanon issue is concerned, perhaps there's no clarity. Pakistanis gave false assurance to Iranians that we will be mediating the Lebanon conflict. Then later, JD Vance says that Lebanon is not included. Israel says that we are ready to mediate Lebanon conflict, but at the State Department in Washington, not in Islamabad. So let's see what happens. All the very best to Pakistan. Perhaps we expect they do good job in mediating. And instead of doing copy-paste mediation, perhaps, which they have been doing from last 24 hours, they should do some actual mediation, and perhaps and hopefully this ceasefire lasts long.
Absolutely, which is why they are under pressure to, in fact, deliver in terms of having some sort of bridging of that trust gap that is currently between Tehran and Washington, even if no peace deal is arrived upon. One is not even expecting that at the moment. But let's quickly bring in retired Major Manik Jolly, who will be joining us in the studio in just a bit. But I'm also joined in by Navdeep Suri, who's a former Indian High Commissioner to Egypt and UAE. Many thanks to you, Ambassador Suri, for joining in. If I could quickly bring you in, to begin with, share your assessment of the visuals that are coming in from Pakistan right now. A firm handshake exchanged between US Vice President JD Vance and, of course, Field Marshal Munir. What do you make of the body language and, of course, the overall disposition of the US Vice President at the moment?
Well, there's no doubt that in the last year, we've seen a considerable improvement in relations between US and Pakistan. There's also no doubt that Field Marshal Munir has struck a bit of a personal relationship with President Trump, and that's something that you see being reflected in the welcome that is being accorded to Vice President Vance. So I don't see this as anything extraordinary.
All right. And in terms of now the US delegation, we are being told, Ambassador Suri, is in fact 300 members. It comprises 300 members. On the other hand, you have the Iranians, close to 70 of them. What do you make of the numbers if one were to compare both sides?
Well, any US delegation travels with a very large contingent of specialists, of linguists, of security personnel, of intelligence personnel. That's standard procedure. The vice president arrives in Air Force Two, and there's a standard drill to these things. The Iranians probably have a smaller contingent, which is normal for them. But again, I would typically expect that there would be regional specialists, area specialists, intelligence experts, security experts. All of these people will not be at the table. They will be there to give their advice to the principals.
Right. Let's, in fact, going to request you, Ambassador, stay with us. We are getting in some breaking inputs as this is a CNN News 18 Mega exclusive. In inputs that have been brought to us by investigations editor Manoj Gupta, we are being told that Pakistan has been briefing both sides, and Iranian demands and positions have also been shared with Pakistani intermediaries. Now, Pakistan is conveying them to arriving, in fact, before arriving of the US team, there's also an expectation of a direct face-to-face meeting between the United States and Iran. Remember, important to emphasize that it's still an expectation. Whether or not that actually translates, we'll have to see. The main process is expected to start today, any time from now, soon after the US Vice President JD Vance's arrival that, as you can see, has already happened. Let's quickly go across to Siddhant, who will share more details. Yes, Siddhant.
Well, that's right. So, Akanksha, this input has been brought to us by Securities Editor Manoj Gupta. Now, Manoj is reporting that Pakistan has been briefing both sides, and Iranian demands and positions were shared with Pakistani intermediaries. Now, Pakistan conveying them to the arriving US team. Direct face-to-face US-Iran meetings are the main purpose, expected to start Saturday, April 11, or shortly after Vance's arrival. In fact, JD Vance arrives in Islamabad. Reports suggest an ambitious but realistic goal of 2-3 rounds of intensive talks with both delegations described as fully empowered. Sticking points remain significant: Lebanon ceasefire linkage, nuclear issues, Hormuz access, sanctions relief. An initial outcome could be extending the ceasefire while continuing negotiations. Iranian demands full lifting of US sanctions, Akanksha, recognition of Iran's right to uranium enrichment, Iranian control and sovereignty over the Hormuz, securities guarantees and non-aggression pact to prevent future attacks, compensation and reparations for war damage, end to all regional conflicts, including Lebanon, a termination of relevant UN sanctions. So there are sticking points. Perhaps that's what Manoj is reporting for us, Akanksha. Let's see how developments take place in Islamabad.
All right, Major Manik Jolly is also joining us from the studios of CNN News 18. Many thanks to you, Major Manik Jolly, for joining in. I'm also joined in by Ambassador Suri at the moment, but if Major Jolly could also weigh in on the body language. It's very interesting set of visuals that we can see right now, where the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar can be seen how he's in fact leading Field Marshal Asim Munir, as Asim Munir looking extremely elated while greeting the US Vice President, who of course is exchanging firm handshakes with the Deputy Prime Minister, with Field Marshal Asim Munir. What do you make of it, Major Manik Jolly?
Yeah, thanks, Akanksha. So, as far as anybody entering into a negotiation, you would expect a very positive and bright kind of, you have to look the part. You cannot be entering in a morose state, and it kind of comes with a defeatist attitude, and you cannot be sitting at such a critical negotiation table if that is the first signal you are sending out. And body language is kind of a first signal. So how US delegation and the Vice President have arrived, large numbers, intimidating officer in a way, and with a very positive outlook, it means it kind of, we are confident what we want. And most probably we will walk away with what we are looking for. And a good point you brought out, it's Asim Munir, who's greeting everyone and leading. It is a traditional shift from how democracies work. I mean, last year after Op Sindoor, when he made himself field marshal, it was an unsaid rule that he will be leading the country. So wherever it is meeting Trump or talking to Chinese or even now receiving JD Vance, he is taking the lead because he is the de facto leader of the country. It is actually a dictatorship, just a front of democracy, and Shehbaz Sharif is working so that the people don't say that it's a dictatorship. The world community doesn't criticize. But that's how it is. And they are also looking very happy and excited because I think Pakistan till now was known as terror state, harboring Osama bin Laden, birthplace of Al-Qaeda, all that. Suddenly they've been elevated to a place where they're negotiators and peacemakers for one of the largest modern days conflicts. So for them it is a very exciting place to be. They won't be able to participate much, that's for sure. They're more of a event management role.
That's true.
Yeah.
But quickly bringing in Ambassador Suri also on that note, what do you make of the fact that Field Marshal Asim Munir is there to, in fact, welcome the US Vice President and not the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif himself?
Well, this is the nature of the hybrid government that they have, where we know very clearly who's the man in charge and who's the one who's taking the orders. So again, no surprises. It's the nature of the structure that you have in Pakistan at this point of time. Not the first time, may not be the last either. Field Marshal Munir's term is there till 2030. So you may see prime ministers come and go, but he's certainly going to stick around for a while, and you should get used to seeing him in this role. But I think the point that was made earlier, Pakistan's role here is more of a facilitator up till now than a mediator. A mediator would be the one which would actually try to bridge the gap between the two sides. Facilitator is the one who's taking messages back and forth between the two sides. So I think the critical thing really to watch over the next 24 hours or so is that are the two sides able to build a degree of confidence and to actually have face-to-face talks rather than sitting in two separate rooms with Pakistan carrying messages back and forth and also carrying the risk of messages getting lost in translation.
Ambassador Suri, is that also a good possibility that could happen, that both do not even come face-to-face?
There's been no direct communication between the two sides for a very long time. I think the only exception that I can recall was a phone call between President Obama and President Hassan Rouhani when the JCPOA was signed in 2015. The nuclear agreement was signed in 2015. I don't recall any other publicized direct contact at that senior level. There might have been contacts in Vienna or in Geneva, the sidelines of the nuclear talks. But I think the presence of Vice President Vance here may indicate that he is prepared to go the extra mile. It's a space that we'll have to watch very closely in the coming hours.
You know, it's very interesting that you got into a bit of history about that, because what we were in fact coming across was this bit of news information that these negotiations between Iran and the United States, especially with the US Vice President at the helm of it, are the highest level US-Iran talks since the 1979 revolution. Because back in 2015, when the nuclear deal talks happened, there were regular negotiations and meetings between the US Secretary of State back then, John Kerry, and his Iranian counterpart, Javed Zarif. But there had been no formal sit-down between the presidents. So we'll actually weigh in on how significant this meeting is going to be, because a lot hinges on these peace talks. Both the sides have some very firm, concrete demands. Let's break them down for you. The US wants a dismantling of all nuclear facilities in Iran, and there is going to be no nuclear option opened for Iran. This is the biggest demand coming in from the US President himself. Then the Iranian preconditions are that they will not surrender. there have to be core strategic capabilities which should be in fact indeed included. Then the US is also looking an end to all uranium enrichment by Iran, also hand over the already existing enriched uranium that Iran is sitting over, to which Iran also has its own set of demands. They are saying that they want a broader framework for any long-term negotiations. Iran, remember, has been saying that there's a pattern to how the US operates. They go by war, ceasefire, talks, war again. And they want to break that pattern. The US again wants to cut the support to any Iraqi Shiite militia or proxy groups that are being supported by Iran. And that doesn't just include the Iraqi proxies. You're also looking at Hezbollah in Lebanon. You're looking at the Houthis in Yemen. A whole lot of terror militia operating over there. Even the Hamas, to a great extent, that has been decimated. Now, Iran wants protection for Iran's regional proxies and the allied militias, many of which I have already mentioned. The US again is looking to cut support to Hezbollah and Hamas, something that the IDF is very much doing on behalf of the United States as it continues to target the terror infrastructure of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Iran is looking towards an end to Israeli strikes on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now remember, this is a very, very important point. This will remain a key sticking point as the talks happen today, because till yesterday we've seen how Lebanon continues to bear the brunt of the conflict as IDF has continued to strike the terror infrastructure of Hezbollah. US is also looking towards a fully reopened Strait of Hormuz. Remember, the US president has already said that if Iran doesn't reopen the strait, they will ensure that it is reopened. Now, as far as Iran is concerned, it is saying that, they will reopen Hormuz under Iranian terms. What are the Iranian terms? They want to levy a toll tax on all the vessels going up to $2 million. They want control over the Strait of Hormuz, which according to the international community is against the international maritime norms. At the same time, US has already said that they want to stop the production of any long-range ballistic missiles by Iran. Iran is still sitting over a huge stockpile of these missiles. Remember, Iran, on the other hand, is saying that they want a binding guarantee from the United States, Israel, that they will not be attacked again, to which, again, US has in fact maintained that they will only give them that guarantee if indeed there is an assurance coming in from Iran that they will give up on their nuclear weapons program and their ballistic missiles production. Let's quickly take it forward with our guests who continue to stay with us. I can see Elon Levy, who is a former Israeli government spokesperson, is also joining us right now. Alan, thank you for joining in. If I could quickly bring you in, what is Israel's expectation out of Islamabad today, given that it's not even present at the talking table?
Yeah, Israel's expectations from Islamabad itself are very low because Pakistan is not an honest broker. This is a country whose defense minister tweeted just the day before yesterday that Israel was an evil, cancerous state that should burn in hell. So Israel is concerned that Pakistan is going to sabotage talks. It is part of the Chinese-Iranian axis and not an honest broker. But what does Israel expect? Well, it wants the United States to get a deal that addresses the triple threat of Iran's ballistic missiles, its nuclear program, and its support for terrorist proxies throughout the region, which are a threat to the United States, to Israel, and to the Gulf countries that now want a much tougher line against Iran. Israel will be concerned that the Iranians are trying to play the United States to take them for fools. And for what it's worth, Vice President JD Vance is warning the Iranians not to play them. They're aware that the Iranians may not be negotiating, probably will not be negotiating in good faith.
Major Manik Jolie, would you like to weigh in on how Israelis are currently viewing the Pakistani position at the moment, given that Israel doesn't even have bilateral relations with Pakistan? Pakistan's not even recognized Israel as an independent state. What does it speak of Pakistan currently in this position of mediation? Is it even going to be trusted, something that Alan has also highlighted?
Exactly. I mean, I agree with what he just said. Firstly, Pakistan is not a negotiator, mediator, nothing at all. It's an event organizer to put it simply. It is a location that has been decided, and only because there was no way for US to communicate with Iran. Even Iran would not listen to Pakistan, so they were asked to go through China. So Pak reached China, China reached Iran, and that is how this table was set.
All right. Malik, just stay with me. Alan is here for just a few minutes, I'm being told by my team. Alan, if I could quickly bring you in on that tweet which had been sent out by the Pakistani Defense Minister Khwaja Asif and later deleted. Have the gaffes by Pakistan, whether it is Khwaja Asif's tweet or even the Pakistani Prime Minister's tweet, which clearly said that it was a draft, have these gaffes already overshadowed the guts that Pakistan was displaying by proposing or now acting as negotiator?
About this extraordinarily violent tweet from the Pakistani defense minister, because it's a real mask-off moment. To call Israel a democratic ally of India and the United States, an evil, cancerous state that should be got rid of, and Jews should burn in hell, Israel understands that as a threat of annihilation by a nuclear-armed state. And it shows that Pakistan cannot act as a source of regional stability if it is determined to support regional instability and back a regime that has funded terrorist forces throughout the region. So I think Indians should also be very concerned about the increased global role that Pakistan is being given through these negotiations, whether as a mediator or simply as an event host, because this is part of Pakistan regaining its international legitimacy, laundering its image, and this extreme statement from the Pakistani defense minister really reminding us how much extremism and support for terrorism still remains.
Alan, the other key sticking point is, of course, going to be hinging on Israel and Lebanon, given that the IDF continues to strike the Hezbollah infrastructure. And even though Israel and Lebanon will be engaging in Washington, will Israel be willing to sort of abide by whatever conclusion the US president arrives upon after these peace talks are wrapped?
The United States and Iran have negotiated a ceasefire between them, and that does not give immunity to Iran's proxy army in Lebanon. Let's understand the problem in Lebanon. Southern Lebanon is controlled by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy army. It takes its orders directly from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In the last month, Hezbollah has fired over 7,000 missiles and drones at Israeli families at the northern border. Israelis in villages on the border now are sleeping in their bomb shelters. Many people can't even return home because the bombardment is so heavy. And Israel is determined to eliminate that threat from Hezbollah, from the proxy army that the Lebanese government keeps promising to dismantle and never does. If Lebanon won't do it, then Israel is going to keep Israeli families safe. India wouldn't tolerate its families getting bombed this way. Israel won't either. But I'll tell you this. Israel has now signaled and begun direct peace talks with Lebanon. Israel wants to reach an agreement that creates peace with Lebanon and dismantles Hezbollah. Not just another ceasefire that freezes the problem of Hezbollah in place and leaves the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps free to continue arming the proxy army that has oppressed Lebanon and brought terror to the people of Israel.
But Alan,
yes
don't
to peace,
you think
no to a simple ceasefire.
I'm afraid I'm interrupting you because I'm running short of time. My last question, don't you think it makes sense for a tactical pause on the part of Israel as well, given that it's a very fragile ceasefire and one must wait for these peace talks to arrive to a conclusion?
Israel needs to remove an immediate threat to Israeli families who are sitting ducks. People in the north have seconds to duck for cover when there is a missile threat. And so what Israel wants to do is to remove that threat to make sure that Israelis can live safely in their homes. And then we can talk to Lebanon about how to dismantle the rest of Hezbollah. But Israel cannot leave Israeli families sitting ducks to the proxy army operating from Lebanese soil that the Lebanese government has been powerless or unwilling to disarm.
All right. Many thanks to you, Alan Levy, for sharing those precious insights and joining our discussion here today on CNN News 18. And with that, it's time to slip into a quick break. Stay tuned as we come back with our live and rolling coverage from Islamabad.
where the investigation is leading. Central agencies are now stepping into this entire case. The Anti-Terrorism Squad, National Investigating Agency and Intelligence Bureau are all tracking the developments in this particular case and widening the scope of this high-profile case. Ananya, my colleague, now joins us, getting us more details on this. Ananya, initially it was seen as a criminal conspiracy, but now it looks like there is a much bigger plot that is being investigated, which is why the IB, the NIA are also involved?
Absolutely, as you rightly mentioned, now central agencies like the NIA, ATS and IB have also been involved as a locus. Local police did inform all the central agencies of this particular incident that has happened in Nashik MNC, and now these central agencies are also planning to probe the whole incident, and the certain elements of investigation will be if there was a wider nexus, or was there a wider organization that was involved behind this, was there any anti-national links that were connected to this, was there a larger nexus, or was it just limited to this particular MNC in Nashik? And investigation will also follow along the lines of whether there was a future plan of continuing to attempt all these anti-religious and conversion attempts that were happening in that particular MNC. They will also explore if there was any external funding that was involved, any if this whole scandal was part of a broader conspiracy. Investigations will follow along the lines, and the ATS, NIA and IB teams are expected to reach Nashik today, and they also plan to, once they reach here, they look into it, they also plan to interrogate the ones who are already sent to judicial custody. So a total of 8 accused have come forward in this case, 6 of whom who have been already sent to judicial custody. One of the HR who was produced in court yesterday has been sent to police custody, and one Nida Khan, who was part of this whole gang and who was part of this whole group, is absconding. The SIT and the local police have launched search operation teams to look for her and to look for her involvement in this particular case, as to what extent was Nida Khan involved in this, and they are still searching for her. And once all the 8 accused are here, central agencies will also continue to probe into this and look at the broader angles of from when was this going on? Were the same people who are accused, were they doing it in particular companies in which they were involved before this also, or was this a first thing? Now, certain investigation angles have also come forward. There were WhatsApp groups being used for this. A certain WhatsApp group was made in which, targets were identified as to who will be
so it clearly wasn't random. These individuals were picked out, they were targeted, and that's something that is being alleged, that's something that's being investigated. Ananya, for the moment, thank you so much for getting us the latest on that front, where the investigation is leading. Central agencies are now stepping into this entire case. The Anti-Terrorism Squad, National Investigating Agency.
Welcome back. We are back with the latest visuals now coming in from Islamabad. This, as just a while ago, remember the US Vice President JD Vance arrived in Pakistan. He was, of course, received by Field Marshal Munir. And in the latest, we are being told that US President Donald Trump's key diplomatic envoy, which comprises the Middle Eastern representative Steve Witkoff and his own senior advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner, are very much part of the latest delegation that has now arrived in Pakistan. Those visuals we will be bringing to you in just a bit, but information has arrived. Remember, we were telling you here at CNN News 18 that the Americans are going to arrive in various phases, and so the first, as we all could see, was of the arrival of the US Vice President JD Vance, who arrived in Air Force 2, and in those latest visuals that we are bringing to you is the arrival of the Middle Eastern envoy of the United States, that is Steve Witkoff. As you can see, he's being received by the Pakistani Deputy Prime Minister, Ishaq Dar, also the Foreign Minister, and right behind Steve Witkoff, you can see, is the senior advisor to Donald Trump, also his son-in-law Jared Kushner, the tall, lanky man. Let's quickly go across to Siddhant, who's joining me from the newsroom. Siddhant, There's, in fact, a lot riding on JD Vance's shoulders, given that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner's understanding of the technicalities has already been questioned in the peace talks earlier.
Well, that's right, Akanksha. So the main guys are in Islamabad, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Now, Jared Kushner, given he is President Trump's son-in-law, he was advisor to President Trump for the Middle Eastern matters during his first tenure as well. In fact, he played a very significant role as far as Abraham Accords are concerned. And this time around, again, not only this one mediation initiative, but whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or whether it's the other places worldwide, they are the real people of President Trump. Insiders, people from the kitchen cabinet of President Trump, members of the kitchen cabinet of President Trump. Steve Witkoff, close friends with President Trump. Jared Kushner, son-in-law. Was associated with him during his first tenure. This time around, again, he is immensely powerful. And perhaps many say that these two individuals are Asim Munir's access to the White House. And now they are in Islamabad. Perhaps Asim Munir himself was there at the tarmac to welcome both Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And after which they left for the talk. So a very interesting observation, Akanksha, here, that when it was to receive the Iranian delegation, Ghalibaf, Araghchi and others, Asim Munir decided to wear the army attire. And when it is to receive Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, he decides to wear suit, pant, tie, wants to give the vibe of the diplomat when dealing with Americans. And when dealing with Iranians, he wanted to be seen as the army chief.
Absolutely. A very interesting observation. In fact, much of the diplomacy also rests on optics, as we can see, is playing out. We will keep coming back to Siddhant for all the latest inputs that are coming in. For now, it's time to slip into another break. Stay tuned to CNN.
Where the investigation is leading. Good morning, hello and welcome. You're tuned into CNN News 18. West Asia developments are dominating the news cycle this weekend because we are seeing talks that are going to take place between United States and Iran in just a few hours from now. But even as before the two sides sit down for those negotiations, Lebanon continues to be pounded. Israel's ambassador to Washington has been quoted by Lebanese media saying that they've agreed to a meeting to discuss peace agreement with Lebanon, not to discuss a ceasefire with Hezbollah. Remember, there was a nudge that came in from Washington for these negotiations to take place, which is why we were learning that there could be these talks as early as next week. But whether or not Hezbollah is included, a ceasefire with Hezbollah is included or not, again, that is going to be something that there is confusion over. Akanksha, my colleague, now joins us, getting us more details on this. Akanksha, as far as these negotiations are concerned between Lebanon and United States over Israel's action there is some confusion on that front too.
Absolutely. And in fact, the word coming in from the Israeli envoy to Washington, Ambassador Lichter, only goes on to reiterate their stance that if they are going to negotiate, that will involve Lebanon and not Hezbollah. Because remember, Hezbollah is a terror proxy of Iran, and it is not even included in the government of Lebanon, even though the Lebanon side will be represented by their prime minister. This as talks happen in Washington next week, which perhaps will be as critical as the ones taking place today. It is important to time again reiterate the fact that today's talks are just going to be a two-sided sort of dialogue between Iran and the United States, one that should ideally have been a quadrilateral because Lebanon and Israel are going to be missing. There are reports indicating that both the United States and Lebanon have in fact requested Israel to come up with a tactical pause and stop striking Lebanon. Whether or not Israel stops, we do not not know, but this is a request just ahead of the talks all set to take place next week in Washington. And more importantly, there is this dichotomy, according to the IDF, the Israel, that Lebanese and Lebanon should not be mistaken for Hezbollah. And because the IDF has made it amply clear, remember Poonam, that they will not stop till they have completely decimated and annihilated the terror infrastructure of Hezbollah, something that they have continued to do so, whether it is destroying their arms and weapons depots, or even all of those crossings that were being used by Hezbollah to smuggle in rocket launchers, arms and ammunition, even bombs, and the kind of material that was required for bomb making as well. So we've seen in the last 48 hours there's been a lot of momentum in those strikes, but for now, no fresh reports, in fact, emerging of IDF striking Hezbollah. We'll have to see how the next few days, in fact, shape up before the talks take place in Washington.
Now, Akanksha, this confusion over Lebanon and whether they were included in this ceasefire agreement or no also came at the behest of Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif was the one who put out on social media saying that all quarters and all theaters of this war will be included in the ceasefire pact. But that's not something that the United States and Israel agreed upon. Is that something that will come up in the talks today as well?
Absolutely, because the US and its stance has been rather wishy-washy over here. Pakistan has maintained that Lebanon was included, as was declared by the Pak Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif himself. And it is Iran which is feeling extremely betrayed, because it has made it amply clear that any talks or any removal of sanctions or any concessions that are granted to Iran must include not just Hezbollah, but also the Houthis, which, remember, have also opened up a new front on behalf of Iran. So for the ceasefire to not have included Lebanon is something that will indeed surface. The fact that Lebanon and Israel are not even there in Pakistan is also going to be a point which is going to be a huge bone of contention, because now, remember, Washington will have to play a parallel role of a negotiator as much as it is playing the role of a participant in Islamabad, but it will be Washington which will be playing host to Lebanon and Israel. So even if, say, Iran and the United States are able to agree upon certain points, for all you know, Israel could very much derail that understanding and take them back to square one if Israel is not, say, on the same page with the US and in terms of the understandings that they do arrive upon in Islamabad, which does seem highly unlikely given it's just day one. We'll have to see how far they can reach, because we've been talking about how it is the trust deficit which is right now the biggest key sticking point right now. There has to be a rebuilding of trust before they can arrive upon any deal.
Akanksha, do stay on with us. That mistrust that has come in is also because of what's happening in Lebanon. In fact, it's not just Israel striking Lebanon and parts of it, but Hezbollah too has been striking different parts of the region, in fact, specifically in Israel. And this is a video that has now been tweeted and put out on social media by Hezbollah themselves. They've released this particular footage showing how Israel's Mishmar base and Haifa naval base in what they claim is occupied Palestine has been attacked. These are visuals of that particular attack that they have released. This also goes on to show, Akanksha, that this is a fight that nobody wants to end at the moment. Israel is pounding Lebanon, but Hezbollah too is saying that we are not down and out. If you pound Lebanon, then we will hit back too.
You're making a very valid point. The visuals speaking for themselves. And Israel's biggest threat right now is, of course, from Hezbollah. Because if one were to break it down on a map, remember, Poonam, we must also talk about how it is a border state as far as Lebanon is concerned. And Hezbollah poses a direct threat. Look at how the Haifa refinery has, in fact, been impacted, because Hezbollah struck Haifa not once, not twice, quite a few times now. And in fact, Lebanon is very close to Jerusalem as well. So all of these videos that are being released, and as we've been seeing, there's also a parallel warfare of sorts in terms of information. The IDF has been releasing videos of their strikes on Hezbollah terror infrastructure. And over here, you have this video being released by Hezbollah of the kind of preparations that they have made. can Israel afford to stay in this war, because it is eventually leading into a war of attrition, because unlike the United States, which has just now entered this conflict, Israel has been fighting for quite some time. If it were to, go back all the way to Gaza, for how long can they afford these continuous strikes? We'll have to see how much Washington can also dictate.
Absolutely. Akansha, stay on with us, because speaking of Hezbollah and what they're doing, there's more information that's now trickling in, and they've issued another statement, is what we're learning. Hezbollah, they're going on to say that we've attacked with a diving drone an Israeli army that was gathering in a house in a town in southern Lebanon. Direct hits have been achieved, is what Hezbollah has gone on to say. Rocket shells, infrastructure of the Israeli army have all been attacked, and this is what Hezbollah is claiming. The occupied city, as they call it, of Safed, that's something that now seems to be hit by Hezbollah. Akanksha.
Right, and we can very much expect all of this to be surfacing at the talking table in Islamabad, because remember, these, even if they have not taken place in the last few hours, these are strikes that have continued in the last 2 to 3 days, and this is what is in fact disturbing the ceasefire, the overall status quo. This is because this is the very reason, remember Poonam, why we are in fact questioning the fragility of the ceasefire, because Hezbollah and the IDF are continuing to trade strikes. And yes, there are going to be peace talks happening in Washington as well, but right now this could very much derail the momentum of these peace talks. And as we've been told, they have been urged to in fact come upon a tactical pause as far as Israel is concerned. But even if Israel does come up with a tactical pause, the big question is, will Hezbollah honor that tactical pause or not? Poonam.
The interesting bit, Akanksha, also is that Israel is not when the negotiations take place in Islamabad today. Iran would say, and Iran would be holding up to the end of the bargain in the sense that they would represent Hezbollah and Lebanon's interests perhaps. But what about Israel's interests? Is that something that the United States will take forward in these negotiations?
Oh, that's a very key critical question, because let's not forget that Pakistan's guts have also been overshadowed by the gaps that we've seen, not just coming from the Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, where his tweet was drafted, or say more disturbingly, you've seen the kind of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic hatred that was spewed by Pakistan's Defense Minister Khwaja Asif, where he's gone on to remind the entire community in Pakistan that this is a war which is against, they're waging against Iran. And so the fact that Israel is not there in Islamabad must also be understood. Why? Because Pakistan doesn't even have a bilateral relationship with Israel. They do not even acknowledge Israel as a state. And that is why Israel itself is extremely skeptical of the role that Pakistan has been playing in these talks. So whatever emerges out of the talks today or during this Islamabad, the peace talk duration, we do not know how much of that will be welcomed by Israel. Will US be able to pressurize, or will the US President Donald Trump be able to use his own good offices with Netanyahu and be able to bring them to the talking table at a later point with Iran as well? We'll have to see that. But for now, Pakistan not having Lebanon, not having Israel in Islamabad is in a tight spot to ensure that the fate of these peace talks is indeed success, is something right now which is really unsure, and we do not know how this actually moves forward.
Right, Akanksha, do stay on with us. We have more information that's now trickling in. The Israeli Home Front Command has now reported that sirens have been sounded in Arab al-Aramshe and several other Western Galilee towns. This is following the detection of a drone from the Lebanese side. So this is also interesting. Which is a proxy, which is not, which is a state actor, which is not. It's very difficult to differentiate between that as well, Akanksha, isn't it?
And we still do not know if this drone was released by the Lebanese government or this was a Hezbollah drone. We do not know the timing of this drone spotting also. But happening in the build-up to the talks, when the US Vice President is expected to arrive in Islamabad any time from now, say in the next 1 to 2 hours, it is going to have an impact on the negotiations. What result it yields, we do not know. But with these strikes continuing and the kind of threat that Hezbollah is posing to Israel, and of course IDF also retaliating. We'll have to see how this shapes up the overall fate of the talks.
Right, do stay on with us, Akanksha. Rabinder Sachdev, international relations expert, also with us. Thank you so much for speaking with us here this morning. It is going to be a tense weekend and the world is going to be watching. What are your expectations from these negotiations that are going to take place in a few hours from now?
Yeah, definitely the world will be watching and very, very intensely under a microscope with a telescope and using binoculars. Okay, my estimate is that the probability of success of these talks, I will put at a 51%. Okay, there is a slight probability, 51%. I mean, the 1% above half and half, that because all parties are in a way also tired and all parties are under a lot of pressure also. Okay, on multiple counts. So there is good chance, and Israel is not there, because Israel being there would have complicated or created some hurdles. Okay, because the Israelis have a different objective and they've been kept out of the discussions for that reason. So I would say this is one wise thing that the Americans have done in this war so far. Okay.
But could that backfire, sir? I mean, if Israel feels that their interests are not being looked into in these negotiations, they could continue their war on Lebanon. And then what happens?
They cannot. I mean, they will continue to some extent. But isn't now Netanyahu coming down and saying, okay, he'll talk, or Israel will talk to Lebanon, okay? And even if it's only ambassador to ambassador in D.C., right? So Israel will have to come around. That is what I think. Otherwise, yeah, sure, this low intensity will continue. It will pause. Maybe it will pause for a couple of days for the negotiations. And depending on how the talks go in Islamabad, of course, then everything is up in the air still. But Israel cannot take out Hezbollah the way it wants on things. It is not possible. I mean, they've run so many, efforts, attacks and all. Sure, they're trying to go up to Litani. But Hezbollah is embedded in the very, political life of Lebanon. Half of people of Lebanon are supporters of Hezbollah. They have about 15 seats in the parliament, and with other coalition members, they have about 60 seats, which is less than half in the parliament. So Israel will have to work out a peaceful or a method to coexist, these two, once Iran is settled.
But Mr. Sachdev, as far as objectives of the United States and Israel are concerned, the objectives with which they went into this war in the first place, most of those objectives have not been achieved. So what was the point of this 40-day war at all?
So very right. Most of those objectives have not been achieved. The point of this war was that Netanyahu wanted to carry out this war. It has been his crusade, let's use the word, to decapitate Iran and take out the regime, which he thought maybe, and this is a failure of Israeli intelligence, I would say, that if they thought that by, decapitating the top layer and the top commanders, the regime, quote unquote, will crumble and people will be on the streets celebrating with joy. So that proved to be incorrect.
Well, that's really the problem as far as these negotiations go. The truce is fragile, but these negotiations are also going to be extremely tense, and we'll keep an eye out on that. Rabinder Sachdev, thank you so much for speaking with us here and sharing your perspective. Well, more information now trickling in. Israel's ambassador, in fact, I beg your pardon, to Australia has said that his country did not expect Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz when it went to war. This is a comment that Israel's envoy to Australia has made to the Australian media. We did not anticipate that the Strait of Hormuz will be closed. Multiple scenarios were planned for, but we did not assume Iran would disrupt global energy supplies. That's a comment that has come in from the Israeli envoy to Australia. And this is in line with Donald Trump and what his admission was a few weeks ago. Akanksha is with me, getting us more perspective and more details on this. Akanksha, this was a clear miscalculation on part of both United States and Israel. I mean, geographically, the Strait of Hormuz is the leverage Iran has. Why did these two countries think that they would not use that leverage too?
Absolutely. In fact, if you go by what the New York Times has also been reporting, they've delved very deep into how this entire war was planned out. So in February, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had a meeting with the US President where he convinced that Iran was the biggest threat and, conquering Iran would be the biggest achievement for the US President in this tenure, something he did manage to buy. And remember, he was much buoyed after what had happened in Venezuela and, in fact, taking off Maduro and taking over the Venezuelan oil market. So perhaps that overconfidence on the part of the US President and Prime Minister Netanyahu's own sort of achievements and strategic achievements that he's managed in Gaza so far, whether or not they should be looked as achievements is still debatable. But that sort of helped them to wage on this war. Clearly, this word coming in from the Israeli envoy to Australia is also exposing Israel's own strategic miscalculations, the big blunders that have gone into this. Something that has already been reported was pointed out by the US Vice President JD Vance when he had a word with the Israeli Prime Minister and reminded him that to, in fact, assume that they'll be able to manage or orchestrate an entire regime change in Iran was the biggest calculation error by the Israeli Prime Minister. That sort of has cost them mighty. And now to come to the point of the Strait of Hormuz, you have it straight from the horse's mouth. The Israeli envoy going on to claim that they never estimated that they'll perhaps be blockading the Strait of Hormuz. As energy experts have already highlighted, this is an unprecedented scenario. The fact that the entire global community will get impacted was also not factored in, something that the Israeli envoy to Australia has also talked about. Perhaps they had also not weighed in on the kind of economic impact and the bloodbath it would lead to at the stock markets and the retaliatory strikes, more importantly, against all of those US Persian Gulf allies was also not factored in.
Right, Akanksha, so there is a lot of mistrust as far as these negotiations go, but give us a sense to our viewers of how large the delegation is on both ends. I mean, it is extremely high level. The foreign minister of Iran is traveling, the vice president of the United States is traveling, and they're coming with an entourage that is much larger than what was initially anticipated.
Absolutely. If we are being told that, the US entourage, on the other hand, is comprising 300 members, whereas you barely have 30 members from the Iranian side, it's between 30 and 70 is what we'll have to check. But most of it can, in fact, be read as posturing. And as they say, that optics do matter even in diplomacy. So the numbers coming in from the American side only speak for the kind of strength and muscle flexing that they are trying to display in Islamabad, because the delegation of the Iranians is certainly not as huge as the American delegation. We all know who will be doing the talking. The talking certainly is going to be done by the US Vice President JD Vance. You could have Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner also joining in as the chorus from the American side, but on the Iranian side, it is Mohammad Ghalibaf, who is the Iranian parliamentary speaker. Most significantly, the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, who, remember, has been shaping up the entire diplomatic talks and conversations coming out from Iran. He will also be accompanied by the Iranian ambassador to Pakistan, along with various security chiefs and the head of the Supreme Council as well. So yes, much of the numbers are, in fact, being used for optics in terms of also muscle flexing. The message coming out is that the US is speaking out of a position of strength and that they already have an upper hand at the negotiating table.
Right, Akanksha, do stay on with us, because ahead of these negotiations, we now have fresh footage that has been released by Qatar this time around. This is footage from the strike in March. Reports have put out this, and this is a video that has been doing rounds on social media, on several news media as well across the West Asia region. The footage which has been captioned, Qatar has released new videos showing damage from Iranian missile strikes. Now, this is at the Ras Laffan industrial city in March. Remember, several such attacks have taken place on energy infrastructure in the Gulf region, including in Qatar. Now, Akanksha continues to be with us. These Qatar energy sites that were hit by Iran, there is now fresh footage that has been released from the Qatari side to show the kind of damage that they have endured during this 40-day war.
Analyze it, Poonam. You see, reminders are coming from both sides. We were just discussing that image that has been released by Mohammad Ghalibaf, the Iranian parliamentary speaker, who is seen standing in his aircraft with images of all of those innocent children who were killed in that strike that had been was conducted by the United States on that school in Minab, where over 170 girls lost their lives, and it's already being called a war crime. So on the other hand, you have US allies like Qatar, which are now releasing fresh footage of the kind of damage that Iran did to Ras Laffan. Remember, they have been extremely livid about how they are having to bear the brunt of this entire war. Not just Qatar, we've seen how UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of them, including Kuwait and Bahrain, have borne the impact. Their oil refineries, their energy infrastructure, all of them have been targeted in the last 40 days of war. For how long will they be able to bear this damage? Because energy experts have already highlighted that even if the war were to come to a halt miraculously today, it will take months, perhaps even years, for the oil industry and for the refineries to be able to make up for the kind of damage that has been inflicted by the Iranian retaliatory strikes. And Ras Laffan in Qatar, remember, happens to be only one of them. We've seen the kind of damage that's been done to the Haifa oil refinery in Israel. We've seen the kind of damage that has been done to the Aramco in Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, we've seen the kind of damage that's been done to the oil depots in Tehran as well. All of this in the last 40 days. And so today, Qatar has made a very conscious decision to release more fresh visuals of that strike. Perhaps you could expect more such video footage of all the strikes that had been traded on both sides to be released.
Right, Akanksha, for the moment, thank you so much for getting us the latest on that front. A lot is at stake as far as these negotiations go, which will get underway in Islamabad in a few hours from now. One of the sticking points between the two sides is enrichment of uranium. Iran says they're doing it only for civilian use. United States says they're very close to building a bomb and that must stop. So what exactly is at stake? Whether there is a common ground, a middle path that the two sides can find on the issue of uranium enrichment. I spoke with former Assistant Secretary of State from the United States, a man who was in charge of non-proliferation, Thomas Countryman, last night. Listen in to his perspective. The first question I want to ask you is, there are huge gaps in the proposals that have been made by both sides. What are your expectations from these talks first up?
I have low expectations because the team that is going to Islamabad, Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner, are not experienced and don't seem to be bringing the right experts with them. Experts in nuclear technology and experts on Iran. So my expectations are not high, but I am trying to be hopeful that they will be able to address the crucial question of removing the highly enriched uranium that Iran has accumulated.
But the red lines on nuclear enrichment are also pretty non-compatible. Do you think that there will be any concessions that are made on that front in these negotiations?
The answer is yes, there is a middle ground. I mean, the problem with the entire talks is that the US has put forward 15 points and Iran has put forward 10 points, and they do not overlap at all. There will have to be compromises on a number of points so that both sides can claim that they came away from an agreement with success. Now, specifically on the question of the right to enrich, there's more than one possible compromise, but it could be that the negotiation simply is silent on that point. The US never officially recognizes Iran's right to enrich, and Iran does not restate its right to enrich. In essence, the compromise is to postpone this question for another time. They will, of course, have to be some kind of agreement on what activities Iran will engage in the meantime, and how exactly the International Atomic Energy Agency fits into that picture.
Now, as far as nuclear enrichment goes, that was one of the key objectives for the United States and Israel to go into this war. Donald Trump says that US will remove all of the buried nuclear dust. That's a recent comment that he made. Do you think that's actually possible? Because Iran is not cooperative on that front.
No, it certainly is possible. It's not a job for the United States. It's a job for the International Atomic Energy Agency. There is no way that the U.S. could go into a hostile environment and remove that uranium by itself. But Iran offered, before this war began on February 20th, to turn over all of that enriched uranium through the International Atomic Energy Agency to another location, perhaps Russia. So I am fairly confident that Iran is still willing to do that, to hand it over through the IAEA to someone else. I don't think they are likely to hand it over to the United States.
Tensions remain high despite ongoing diplomatic efforts in Islamabad. US President Donald Trump has warned that military action remains possible if Iran does not comply. He stated that the United States will move ahead in the Gulf with or without Iran, claiming that he will finish Iran. Iran, meanwhile, has set conditions for these talks, including a ceasefire in Lebanon and the release of their frozen assets. These demands have added strain to the already fragile negotiations that are marked by years of deep mistrust. According to Iran International, the Iranian delegation comprises of around 70 members. 26 technical and specialized experts are on board. The American side is much larger. About 300 members are believed to be traveling, and leading that delegation for America is Vice President JD Vance, along with figures such as Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The focus is going to be on structured discussions. There is a 10-point proposal from Iran. There is a 15-point proposal from the United States. But what is going to be the middle ground for these negotiations? All eyes are on that.
And we'll find out what's going on. They're militarily defeated. And now we're going to open up the Gulf with or without them. But that'll be open. We're going to be, or the strait as they call it. And I think it's going to go pretty quickly. And if it doesn't, we'll be able to finish it off one way or the other. It's going well. No, we're not going to let that. It's international water. If they're doing that, nobody knows if they're doing that. But if they're doing that, we're not going to let that happen.
Well, US intelligence data is now showing that China is preparing to send weapons to the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is amid a ceasefire, a fragile one at that, continues. Also, these reports coming at a time when the two sides sit down at the negotiating table. Akanksha, my colleague, now joins us, getting us more details. What are these US intelligence assessment claiming about China's role, Akanksha?
Right. So there is a report in CNN which is sharing this US intel assessment, which goes on to talk about how Iran is looking towards China for the replenishment of its weapon systems. More importantly, it's also talked about how China could be providing them man-pads, which, remember, are shoulder-fired anti-craft weaponry. And this, in fact, is something that China could very well also provide Iran at the moment. Now, this is indicating that the fears of how the ceasefire could be misused by Iran are now coming true. And it could also be sending a very wrong message to Washington as far as Beijing's role is concerned, because so far Beijing has only touted itself as playing a very positive role in the overall negotiations, where many are saying that even though Islamabad may be playing host to the talks, the fact of the matter remains that it was China that pushed Iran into coming to the talking table. So where does this leave China's role? Washington is, of course, going to be viewing Beijing extremely suspiciously, and that too just ahead of the talks that are supposed to take place in a few days from now between President Xi of China and the US President Donald Trump.
Marked by deep mistrust.
Meanwhile, Islamabad is under heavy security ahead of expected meetings. Iran has reportedly agreed to a framework for talks, but continues to push key conditions, with China playing a behind-the-scenes role in facilitating dialogue. If held, these talks would mark the highest-level US-Iran engagement since 1979. All right, we're getting some breaking news. As per Iran International, Iranian negotiation team consisting of 70-member delegation, of which about 26 members are part of the technical and specialized committees. The American team, with about 300 members, is headed by JD Vance and includes individuals such as Witkoff and Kushner. Iran's focus on serious and specialized discussions within the framework of the 10-point plan. All right, so this is going to be a very, very crucial day today. All eyes are going to be in Islamabad, as we've already seen the visuals of the Iranian delegation reaching there in Islamabad. A short while we'll be seeing a JD Vance-led delegation of United States in Islamabad. Akanksha Swaroop is with us in the studios here. She's of course be tracking all these developments relating to this. Akanksha, what is lying ahead?
All right. So we all know that the Iranian delegation is there. We are being told that the Americans are arriving in phases. As far as the American delegation is concerned, it's being headed by the US Vice President JD Vance. The Iranian side, of course, will be represented by Mohammad Ghalibaf, who is the Iranian parliamentary speaker, and very importantly, the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi. The stage is set in Islamabad. Arun, let's not forget, a lot rests on these talks. Not just for the world, not just for the millions who are dying and are affected in the Middle East, but also the global economy, including people like you, me, and many other viewers who are watching us. We've seen how the entire global economy has come to a screeching halt because of this ongoing conflict. Perhaps no war, as much as the ones that we've seen, whether the one in Gaza or even the one in Ukraine, have not had so much of an impact as much as this war in Iran and the one in West Asia, given the retaliatory strikes that have completely shaken up the region. And for Pakistan, also, as far as Islamabad is concerned, a lot hinges on these talks as far as the diplomacy, their own reputation is concerned. We'll have to see whether these talks lead to any kind of concrete results, or is there a collapse, or are they going to, in fact, head into a disaster? We do not know, because there is a parallel front being opened up in Washington, where Israel and Lebanon will also be approaching the United States. They are not going to be present in Islamabad.
And Akanksha, right before this peace talk, we are seeing Donald Trump, of course, coming out with that post saying that our military is ready. If Iran doesn't really go with what they want,
and that is also sort of reiterating what the US Vice President JD Vance had to say. He had, in fact, endorsed Donald Trump's own words that we are willing to talk with Iran. If they are willing to invest in these peace talks, we will go the full, we'll go the whole hog. They'll walk the extra mile. But as you rightly highlighted, that post coming out of the US President, as far as that Truth Social post is concerned, important that you mentioned that, because this is also Washington's way of exercising greater pressure, greater leverage, and it is their way of also flexing muscle and reminding the Iranians that this is the chance that you have to arrive upon some sort of a negotiation or a peace plan or a conclusion, because if you don't, then all hell is going to break loose, as the US President has already highlighted.
And anything, Akanksha, that you're picking up on the part of Israel, because they've been pounding Lebanon, do you think they're on board with the United States when they say that as long as this peace talk is going on, do not really go hard on Lebanon? Or would Lebanon be excluded, or would be made part of this ceasefire?
So it's important you ask that question, because ideally these talks should have been a quadrilateral format. You will not have two key players who are in the line of fire in this conflict, which is namely Israel and Lebanon. And I'm going to request Arun also to join me. So Arun, we know that Washington is going to be playing mediator for Israel and for even Lebanon, given that they'll not be present in Pakistan. Pakistan. Israel is not even recognized as a state by Pakistan, and that is why perhaps Pakistan doesn't have enough trust. In fact, Israel doesn't have much trust in Pakistan at the moment, which is understandable why they have approached Washington to do this talking. And for Lebanon, let's not forget the last 2 to 3 days, what we've been witnessing, the way Lebanon's been pounded.
Absolutely.
We are being told that the Lebanese Prime Minister will be representing Lebanon, but it is the Hezbollah terror infrastructure which is currently being targeted by Israel. They are saying that they will not stop till they have completely decimated the Hezbollah terror infrastructure, whether it is their underground shafts which are housing weapons depots or all of those crossings close to the Litani River. Lebanon, in its defense, of course, has been maintaining that there's already a humanitarian crisis ever since the war in Gaza. You have millions of refugees, particularly Palestinians, who are currently seeking refuge in Lebanon. What happens to all of them? So a host of concerns. We'll have to see how this actually shapes up.
Lots of questions, and of course we'll be tracking all these developments coming from Islamabad throughout the day. Akanksha, of course, would be around. Now let's just go back to studio to Shreya.
And we're now just getting some breaking news. Speaker of the Iranian parliament, Vance-Ghalibaf, has arrived for the negotiations with the United States. Now, this is information that we're getting from our sources in the Iranian embassy. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas, Araghchi, the Secretary of Defense Council Ali Akbar Ahmadian, and others will be part of these negotiations. The Iranian negotiation delegation is led by Mohammad Vance-Ghalibaf, who is the Speaker of the Parliament and is now in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, to negotiate with the American side. Now, viewers, this delegation consists of security, political, military, economic and legal committees. If the other side accepts Iran's preconditions for starting the negotiations, these talks will begin.